Welcome, fellow nerds, geeks, and aficionados of the dark and mysterious. I'm Hal Hefner, your guide through the realms of nerd horror. Ever wondered how a big old brain can defeat the most terrifying monster? Then join me and special guest Justine Norton-Kertson on the Nerd Horror Podcast as we discuss the film Becky.
And finally just has to take a knife and plops his own eye that's it's hanging out of his head by the stringy eye goodness, and he just plops it down onto the table and smacks it with this sharp knife. Oh, it's just your whole face is on fire watching it because you can just feel what he must be going through. Oh my god.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is nerd horror right there.
Totally.
Horror.
This is Nerd Horror, a podcast dedicated to discussing an overlooked genre of horror films where nerds rule the narrative from the darkness or the light. I'm your host, Hal Hefner, artist, writer, filmmaker, and nerd. And in case you didn't know, nerds rule horror. And today, I have a very special guest with me, Justine Norton-Kertson, founder of Solarpunk magazine and recently named to the Grist 50. Justine, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into this very special episode.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Like you said, I started Solarpunk magazine. So that is kind of the big thing that I'm up to. Well, one of the big things I'm up to at the moment. That publishes 6 times a year, and it's a short story magazine. So it's a lot of fun. And then I also own the publishing company Android Press that publishes Solarpunk magazine. And then we publish science fiction and fantasy and horror books as well, novels, novellas. We're starting to publish some games, RPGs, and stuff like that as well. So it's a lot of fun. It's not a bad way to spend your time.
Exactly. And for those who don't know what Solarpunk is, perhaps we could, give our audience a little sneak peek into Solarpunk and what it's all about.
Yeah, great idea. So Solarpunk is basically a movement. It spans a lot of different kind of cultural zones, I guess. It's a literary movement. It's architecture, fashion. It's found its way into influencing TV and films, and then it's also kind of, especially over the past couple of years, reached into the activist world, and you actually have activists who are calling themselves solar punks, and the whole gist of the movement is imagining what a more sustainable, healthier, kind of climate change free world, what that might look like, and even further than just the environmental aspect, a world where other big global social problems like racism, imperialism, colonialism, things like that have been solved or are on their way to being solved, and so really looking at what that world might look like and kind of thinking about how we can get there. And that's exactly. Basically what's going on.
And what's been nice too is that's how we know each other. We know each other through the whole solarpunk genre, and it is a fun evolving genre of science fiction. It's very hopeful, but there's also some interesting room for horror. And together, Justine and I are exploring some of those realms of nerd horror within Solarpunk. So today we are talking about Becky, which is a very interesting little horror film that wormed its way into pop culture through COVID. Kind of flew under the radar, but it's starting to gain an interesting cult following And that's how I found out about Becky. And then I shared it with Justine, and we were both kind of blown away by this amazing little film. So, just to give you a interesting little take on Becky, but before I get in there, one of the things I want to say is this is needless to say, this is a spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen Becky yet, stop right now and watch it. It won't disappoint. Becky is a crazy film that is filled with surprises, and it's a fresh new franchise that has legs to keep going and going. There are 2 films. Today, we're going to be talking about the first. All right, let's get to the story of Becky. She's a spunky 13-year-old girl who heads to her family's secluded cabin for a weekend getaway. She plans on nothing but relaxation. But when a group of ruthless neo-Nazis hunting for a mysterious artifact, led by none other than the surprisingly menacing Kevin James, invade her peaceful retreat, they quickly discover that they've picked the wrong teenager to fuck with. Armed with her wit, resourcefulness, and a knack for creative traps, Becky turns her family's cabin into a deadly playground for a game of cat and mouse like you've never seen before. This pint-sized powerhouse and her thirst for revenge is a wild ride where teenage smarts meet unexpected savagery, as Becky proves that brains and bravery can outmatch even the toughest villain. There is my goofy synopsis for you right now to get this thing started. So let's dig in. Let's talk about this film, because it is a weird one. I think the thing that both shocked us both is that when you first meet Becky, she's kind of a brat, right? You know, we first meet her and she's kind of like, she's really annoying, and you know, she's just kind of an asshole to her father, who's played by comedian Joel McHale.
Yeah.
And she just relentlessly gives him shit as they drive to their vacation house in the country. When they're on their way, she has this weird little run-in with the family reunion.
Yeah, she walks into the market and there's like a family of people who are in there, and they're all wearing this exact same shirts, same colors, same, you know, like they're at some kind of like family reunion or something. Because kind of like really emphasizes like the isolation that she's feeling, and brattiness. I mean, you see that in that scene too, I think. But yeah, they really set her up at the beginning of the film as like a kind of like really bratty, pubescent teenager. Right? I mean, just like the way she looks at everyone, and you know, just always sort of like very condescending sort of look and an air about her as she kind of moves through school and the town and things like that in the first few scenes.
It's like she's just pissed off at the world. And as you mentioned, that isolation, what you get from that scene is that you find out that her mother passed away from cancer, and she's basically like not dealing with it. So this kind of sets up Becky's character, where she's kind of got nothing to lose, right? And so as she goes to the cottage with her father, unbeknownst to Becky, his girlfriend and her son show up, and that doesn't work out so well, because obviously Becky just can't understand why her father would have a girlfriend. It makes for some drama and tension as he tells her at dinner that he's going to marry this woman, and so she storms off in a hissy, throws another tantrum, and then runs. It's like her little nerd sanctuary, you know, where she was, you know. Yeah, it is. It's like her little nerdy treehouse where it's almost like a time capsule of when she was a little kid and her mom was alive, and there's that painting and all those colored pencils and all the drawings and stuff like that. It really, it's in a way, it's like her childhood encapsulated.
And almost like a little shrine to her mom. Yeah, I mean, there's that scene where she's like really pissed. Well, it's the whole first part of the movie, but when they get there and she's like, "What are we doing here?" and she's I guess her father had been considering selling the cabin, and it was obviously the place where the whole their family went and spent a lot of time together. He tells her that he's actually not going to sell it, so
Right.
she's all excited. She doesn't know why yet, so she'll end up pissed again really soon. But
Exactly. And then we also have to mention Becky has two badass dogs. Like they're I think they're I don't know if they're Rottweilers or what the hell they are, but they're pretty badass dogs, especially Diego.
Yeah, they might be
who-
part
who-
Rottweiler, but I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
they look
I'm
like
not-
they've got a little bit of like boxer, or even
Terrier,
maybe a little
maybe?
bit of pit or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, like they're big dogs that
Yeah.
look like they could be very mean and eat you.
So,
Yeah.
needless to say, all is not roses in Becky land right now.
No,
It's
yeah,
more or less, it's about ready to turn into manure. While she's in the tree house, hanging out, just kind of, throwing a tantrum, Kevin James and his neck-bearded Nazi racist douchebags, they all show up. Got like this, 8-foot mutant dude who's like, who's played by a Canadian wrestler. And then a bunch of other, goofy dudes that are basically they're terrifying the father and the young son and the girlfriend.
Right.
And so, but the crazy thing is the young son and the girlfriend are both black. So obviously, it makes the tension even more so when Kevin James starts going off on his racist tirade about the perfect.
That's
race
really where the tension starts, because they show up at the cabin, the Nazis, and they're just sort of pretending to be whoever. They're lost, or they're this, or they're from up the road or whatever. I can't remember
I'm
the
searching for
story
my
that
lost
they
dog.
tell. But then Kevin James's character, Dominick, starts saying these innuendos about how things shouldn't mix. Right, and it's like obvious.
Yep,
becomes
and the
pretty
Rottweiler.
obvious pretty quickly. Yeah, that's right. He's talking about dogs, right, and his Rottweiler and how it's a purebred, and Joel's character Jeff is like, oh well, ours are just mutts, and so it becomes and then you can see Kayla, Amanda Bruegel's character, really just like the look on her face is like she knows what this dude's talking about and what he's referencing. And he takes his hat off.
Exactly,
and
that's why she's like, all right, time for you to get the fuck out.
Yeah, we're dead. Oh, shit.
While this is all going on, Becky's kind of just hanging out in her treehouse, not knowing what's happening. Right? So then he starts talking about this key, right? He's they're looking for some key. And we don't really find out what that key is until we see Becky playing with that key. So while this is all happening, he's terrorizing the Kayla and her little son and Joel McHale, and so they run away and are allowed to leave by the big mutant wrestler guy who killed before we get here. He kills like 2 kids, and so he's having like second thoughts about following Kevin James and stuff, and so he lets Kayla and her son run away. But then she just runs into these 2 idiots, these 2 fools in the woods, 2 other little lackeys for Kevin James, Dominick, I should say. And then one of Becky's dogs escapes and goes running at them, and they shoot her. And so Becky sees this happen, right? And so now Becky's scared, and she's trying to figure out what the hell is going on. One of the things that the plot is all about this key. And so when Becky sees the dog killed, she runs to the house and tries to find out what's going on. This is really where it takes off. This is really where the movie begins, and Becky stops being this kind of annoying little nerd, and this rage takes over. And from here, this is where we really get to see her nerd horror really begin. And eventually she's gonna whoop ass and take names in pretty badass fashion. So now that we've kind of set up the plot, let's examine just how and why Becky makes a nerd horror film nerdy. So I think the first thing we can say about Becky, she's a quick thinker, right? She's always reacting to like swiftly dangerous situations, making decisions on the fly, and really kind of indicates she's sharp, very smart, ability to stay calm under pressure.
Yeah, I would even say like strategic. Like she
Yeah,
she knows how to think like steps ahead even, right? Like she's not just reacting to the big scary murdery guys that are trying to kill her. Like she and maybe not right at first, but very quickly gets to the point where she's thinking and planning multiple steps ahead and is like flipping the script around on them, right? And really fucking with them and screwing with them.
yeah, she really does. I mean, and she uses the walkie-talkies to do it a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
and she really kind of, just like you were saying, she does definitely plays like mind games with these, with these idiots,
Mhm.
and it's a real interesting kind of take on horror films, and as you mentioned, strategy, escape planning too, right? It's like she's devising all these intricate plans to evade them and protect her loved ones in the process. Really demonstrating an ability to think, like you mentioned, several steps ahead.
Yeah.
But that quick thinking backfires on her.
That's sort of the crux of it, right? And then and then she has to kind of
Yeah.
has to get her hands dirty, so to speak.
Yes, yeah, because basically in this kind of like game of cat and mouse that she's playing with them, she lies to Kevin James about the key because he's
Right.
like, where I'm looking for something, blah blah blah, and she slips up and says, I don't have the key. So immediately he's like, duh, I didn't say it was a key. It's
Yeah.
so this ultimately lying though costs her dad his life. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
Joel McHale guy kind of.
well, through the walkie-talkie at least, like I've listened to him get tortured and all of that. So I mean, I guess you can't really fault her reasoning considering that she's really kind of snapped and isn't in a reasonable state of mind anyways, but still definitely a very sharp-witted state of mind.
Yeah, and I would say that first the dog, she watches her dog murdered,
Mhm.
then she sees her father, and I think the father is, if the dog makes her snap, then the father pushes her over the cliff, right? And so because now she's enraged, and instead of kind of like act in the prepubescent, bratty way that you would have expected.
So let's take a look then now, I guess, at another way that Becky really kind of fits the kind of definition of nerd, and it's her real in-depth knowledge of her environment, right? It's the area around her is really something that she's clearly very familiar with, knows it like the back of her hand, right? She utilizes that knowledge of the cabin and the surrounding woods to her advantage. And is really able to turn the environment into a weapon that leads to strategic hideouts. She finds hiding spots that are they're like well constructed, strategically positioned to gain an advantage over Dominick and these other big dudes that are chasing her. And then she sets up some really cool, resourceful traps that ultimately kind of lead to some pretty cool kills.
She sets this whole trap up using fishing line and some overturned boards from a dock. And one of these Nazi goons comes running at her, and he sets off the trap. The board stabs him in the stomach, and then she takes another board with nails in it and smashes him in the head with it, and
beats
he's got
the hell out of him with it.
Holes in his head.
Yep.
Yeah. Then she knocks his ass into the water, and he's kind of an overweight, kind of oafish, slow, sloppy dude.
Yep.
And sure enough, he can't swim, so he's treading water, and then she gets into the boat. What does she do in that boat? Chops his ass up. She just blends his face with a motor.
Yep.
So yeah, and the look on her face, she's kind of loving. It is a cool scene, and she's kind of loving it too,
Oh yeah, it's one of the moments where, yeah, you can see she's got some sociopath in her or something like that when in that scene when she just has
Exactly,
that look
exactly.
of like enjoyment on her face almost.
Yes, and as we were talking earlier today, one of the things that you mentioned is that in a way Becky's kind of a monster too, you know. And there's an actual we'll kind of get to it, but there's some really good foreshadowing in here that I think we'll touch on in a minute. But yes, it's this that I think is the first scene where you really see that Becky's got some issues too, some mental issues too. So
Yeah.
so yeah, so like, because she, again, some of these resourceful traps that we can touch on as well. She sets a trap for Kevin James at the end where the dog rips his flesh up. Then she runs him over, sets him on fire by using a super
Blowtorch,
soaker.
like a super soaker, yeah.
Super soaker. She turns into a blowtorch. So she, and like, she's doing all this on the fly, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's crazy.
We'll talk about it I think a little later when we get into some of the kills, but I mean, like she's like utilizing zip lines and like, I mean, like talking about like
Yeah.
knowledge of the environment, like and I mean, yeah, it's her cabin, but also, they don't live there, so it's not like she's, it's like a vacation spot, so she doesn't spend that much of her time or her
Right.
life there,
Right.
but she still knows this place so well that, like, even under the intense pressure and fear and like disassociation that she's got to be feeling, because of all the murder, stab, shoot, um, she's still able to just like put it all together and use what's around her to, you know overcome a gang of brutal murderers.
Yeah. And I'd say in a way it's kind of the epitome of nerd horror because
Hmm.
she's strictly using her brain, right? And to adapt on the fly and turn everything into weapons. And I think another one of her real strong traits is weapon proficiency. Like, she exhibits proficiency with various improvised weapons throughout the whole thing. And it really highlights her ability to adapt and use the surroundings intelligently, really take
Hmm.
advantage of her brain. And again, after Kevin James, kills her dad, that sets her off. And so, as I mentioned, this one key, the first kind of brutal horror thing that we see is when she stabs Kevin James in the eye with the key, the actual
Yeah.
key. She has it and stabs him in the eye, and that leads to a pretty gross scene with Kevin James.
Yeah. It's one of those ones that really makes you wince and like pretend to cover your eye, but you're really still looking. Woo! And like pucker up your butt cheeks. Oh.
Exactly, because what he does when he rips out his own eye is it literally cuts it off. It's
Oh.
freaking
But it's not even
nasty.
just that he cuts it. It's that, like, well, first of all, he tries to have Apex, the Canadian wrestler guy,
Yeah.
Robert Milott, his character, Apex. He tries to have him cut it with like pruning shears or something like that, or scissors, some kind of scissors, and it's just not happening. And so it's like, chomp, 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 and Kevin James, Dominick is screaming, and finally just has to like take a knife and plops his own eye that's like, right, it's like hanging out of his head by the stringy eye goodness, and he just like plops it down onto the table and smacks it with the sharp knife. And oh, it's just like your whole face is on fire watching it because you can just feel what he must be going through. Oh my god.
And ladies and gentlemen, that is nerd horror right there.
Totally.
If we're talking about weapons, right? Obviously using whatever is around her. But I think her best it's the best kill because it sets the tone and it's her first kill, and it really, I mean, you can't get any nerdier than this. She literally puts on that goofy old fox hat that she has, and she makes this like makeshift kind of like zip line
Mhm.
After she breaks a ruler and ties a bunch of colored pencils together and attacks one of the goofs that is Kevin James' clan of Nazi douchebags, and literally stabs the fucker with the ruler. Kills him with the ruler and the colored pencils. Death
Yeah.
by ruler.
I mean, that's how nerd horror this film is that, like,
Oh yeah.
they're actually using the tools of nerdiness as weapons of murder.
Becky's just using all these different things around her. Using a boat motor, she actually uses a lawnmower, super soaker, but then she does also learn to use a gun and learn to use it well and super fast.
Yeah, but going back to the ruler really fast, because
Right.
that is another scene that it's like, I don't know, they do it throughout this whole film. They do a really good job of, like, it's not a slasher film by any means, but but the kills are like, they take on sort of like an element of realism that I guess you find in slasher kills to some extent. The ruler goes like all the way through the dude's neck, right? Like through the side of his neck. And then you get like this really cool, like, zoom in close up shot of, right? It's one of those old metal rulers that's kind of like got a groove that goes down the center. And you just like see the blood from the dude's jugular vein just like sliding down the ruler and down this little like groove in the center of the ruler, and it's just it's a cool cinematic shot that really highlights the kill, and you can like see the wound on both ends from where the ruler goes in and goes out, and the blood gushing. It's a really cool, just kind of classic horror shot.
Yeah, and I think you touched on something probably doesn't get talked about much when talked about this film, but I think cinematically, I really like the way it's shot. In the very beginning, they juxtapose what's happening to her at school with what's happening to Kevin James in the prison yard. And there's some interesting, it's kind of drawing a parallel that there's a thin line between the two of them, right?
Yeah.
And you don't get it at first. I mean, you get it after you watch the film again for sure. Lulu Wilson puts on fantastic performance as Becky, and she really emotes a lot of the anguish and really sets up all the nerd horror moments I think that make this film fantastic.
Yeah, Lulu Wilson is really great in this film, and you know, she's got I mean, she's no stranger to horror films herself. And I think that shows and the way she's really able to bring out the emotional intelligence in the character of Becky, right? That's one of the really kind of key qualities of that that kind of highlights the nerd horror aspect of the film, is that emotional intelligence, where she seems definitely immature when we first meet her, right? Like the kind of typical condescending, like pubescent teenager. But we come to see her and understand the emotional side of her. She demonstrates a high level of empathy, right? And she demonstrates interpersonal intelligence combined with her fearlessness, and the way that she approaches the Nazis. Really speaks to the fact that she has emotional maturity and intelligence about her that's like beyond the years of her character.
Exactly, because she's really able to analyze these villains in a way that kind of like sets up their behavior. Like she pushes the right buttons. She calls one of them fat and makes fun of him. She knows that she can outrun him. She taunts them pretty bad, especially like I said with that walkie-talkie. And if the mechanisms she uses is that creepy little nursery.
There once was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good. But when she was bad, she was horrid.
Oh yeah.
There's also a really another interesting moment in the film that I think defines this emotional intelligence. So, what I think you can really tell about a character is how other people that know them talk about them. And so there's a really fantastic scene where after she taunts Kevin James, he's pissed, right? And he turns to Kayla, who's Joel McHale's girlfriend, for answers about Becky. And where is she? What you gonna do? Call her. You tell her. And she's like, she's not gonna listen to me. And so check this out.
I need you to tell Becky to come back. You feel better now? I'm not gonna ask again. Speak slow and clear.
She won't listen to me.
You're her guardian.
No, I'm not. And it wouldn't matter even if I was. Becky is as strong-willed and vindictive as they come. And you just tortured and killed her only living parent. So good luck.
As you can see, there's a lot going on in this film. But overall, nerd horror, if you really think about it, the thing that makes this film and Becky so nerd horrific is she's got a tenacious survival skill that's driven her to adapt to the dire circumstances. And she just has a determination to survive, which underscores her intelligence and her resilience. I guess you could sum it up simply as it's her and Diego versus the world, because after she loses Joel McHale, the only family she really has is that dog. She doesn't obviously consider Kayla her family.
Yeah, I mean, when survival skills become killing for Becky, that's really where she's all in, right? I mean, sort of talked about how she seems a little bit sociopathic, right? And at the beginning of the film, we even see her sort of in like a question and answer session with what are presumably psychologists,
Yes.
maybe like plainclothes cops, but probably psychologists.
Yes.
But one of the important scenes that really foreshadows the entire two-film franchise is when one of the goons, Apex, who's really struggling with following Kevin James, right after, right, they kill the two kids or the family early on, right when they escape. But then he warns Becky about what will happen if she continues to kill.
Yes, and as Apex is struggling, he says something to Becky that's very, very prophetic, where he basically warns her about what will happen if she continues to kill.
I saw what you did to Cole. Those kind of things. They leave a stain. I got too many stains of my own. It's not too late for you. You're just a kid. I'm done. I don't care what Dominick wants anymore. I am walking away, and I hope you will too.
And after this quote, and he actually saves her life, Apex, she puts a bullet in him. So,
Yeah.
so his words come true. Becky's killed all these people, and it's basically a bloodbath. And so, to sum it all up, what else can we say about Becky? She lies to the cops. She's, she tells them that they're looking for a Canadian quarter instead of a key.
Mm-hmm.
She's really holding a lot of info back, and she claims she doesn't remember murdering and stuff like that. Is there anything else we could kind of say that we haven't touched on?
I mean, I think this, and it'll be important for the second film too, but I mean, that the moment that we're talking about right here, where Apex kind of alludes to the future that Becky's going to have if she keeps killing. I mean, this kid has basically just turned herself into a serial killer.
Yeah.
Right, and we talked a little bit, very briefly, about the scene at the very beginning of the film where they're like juxtaposing scenes of Becky at school and cruising around town with things that are going on in the prison with the Nazis. And I didn't quite get that at first. I was like,
Right.
oh, like the prison is like Becky's emotions because she's sad about her mom, or like, and that maybe that's part of it, but it really is about like foreshadowing the end of the film and the kills, like that, like Becky is going to become. I mean, maybe she's not going to become a Nazi. I hope not.
No.
But she definitely becomes like a hardened criminal, or if not a hardened criminal, right? Because I mean, it was about survival, so
Right.
I don't know that she's a criminal, but she's a fucking killer,
Yeah.
and she definitely has a serial killer in her now. And so, what's going to happen is she becomes an adult, right? Is that going to be the path that she takes, or is she going to, you know, figure out with some really intense therapy how to keep a lid on the monster that has been released?
Exactly. Because I think what you see is throughout the film, she not only doesn't have a problem killing, but she, in a way, I think she enjoys it, and
Mhm.
she's good at it, and she's cold and calculated and smart. So all of the things that apply to, you know, the way that we talk about murderers and serial killers kind of apply to Becky here, you know, and so it's an interesting franchise because you're rooting for her to get, you know, revenge on all of these horrible people, but wow, is she's a badass.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, and this is not so much about Becky the character, but they really do a good job of creating a protagonist that we're really sympathetic to, but who, I mean, you know, like we said, she's kind of the monster herself, right?
Right.
Like obviously the Nazi murderers are the bad guys, but Becky is very much a monster herself, and but she's a monster that, you know, we're rooting for, you know,
Exactly.
and that's, I always think, is a mark of a really, really good storyteller. Like, if you can get me rooting for the serial killer or the really, really morally fucked up person, then you have done a really, really good job at telling a story and bringing a character to life, because that's hard. It's hard to make people empathize with disgusting people, you know. If you can do that, then fuck, you're a good writer.
Well, there we have it. This is why Becky is a quintessential nerd horror film, and it's a modern nerd horror film too. And recently there was a sequel to this film, which we are gonna talk about. You're gonna come back and talk about this film with me, right?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Awesome. Well, Justine, thank you for being on, you know, this episode of Nerd Horror, and thank you all for listening to Nerd Horror. So, as you know, I'm your host, Hal Hefner, artist, writer, filmmaker, and nerd. And please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us both on our social channels. You can follow me. Mostly I'm hanging out on Instagram. You can find me at Nerd Horror as well as at Hal Hefner. And we're going to have some fun talking about horror films. So join us, and horror TV and all that good horror stuff. So, Justine, where can we find you, and where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, I've got my own personal website that's just JustineNorton-Kertson.com. Yeah, there you go.
Awesome.
And then also SolarPunkMagazine.com or Android-Press.com if you want to get into solar punk or some cool punkish sci-fi fantasy literature.
Amazing. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Justine. And until
Yeah.
next time, keep it nerdy.
Nerdy.
Horror. 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 Horror.